Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be in my home office today talking to you about food safety and kind of really in the line of making safe food choices and the path to purity and transparency. And that can be a really kind of hard conversation to have, especially as a meeting planner. But my friend here, right here, Colleen, and I need to go find your other episode too. She was on the show a couple of years ago, probably first year. Yeah. Oh yeah, because you were one of my 20 women for Women's History Month. Colleen is the founder and CEO of ZEGO Foods. And she does a lot of testing for different protocol or pesticides and toxins and et cetera. And so I wanted to bring her on to talk about how we keep our food safe and how we as meeting professionals, whether you're the chef, the catering person, or the meeting planner, can really think about food safety. And I bring this up because of, you've heard in the news, the Boar's Head recall. And then she brought to attention to me yesterday, Quaker Oats had a recall a couple of months ago on products that we serve at our events. So I get really close in here when we talk about that. So hello, Colleen.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. So I wanted to start off with the question is that I mentioned these recalls, the oats and the Boar's Head meats and cheeses, et cetera. As a food manufacturer, and I'm going to jump in later on what you actually produce, do these recalls scare you? And I'm going to add a little tangent there is that I was talking to somebody else in food service the other day. It works for Levy Restaurant Group, and he was just rattling off the recalls that he sees on a daily basis. So do these keep you up at night? Do they worry you? And should they worry us?
So for me, they make me really mad.
Okay.
They don't worry me as far as my product goes, because you should be able to put controls in place that mitigate the risk of these pathogens. So we're talking about salmonella, E. coli, listeria. They're in the environment, right? They exist. So our job as people who run facilities and provide ingredients and finished product is to have those critical control points where we know that it can be a problem. And we have a written out plan that everyone is trained on, and we test and we make sure that it's clean. And there's a number of ways that you can test it at a number of different cost levels. And if you are following that, you should not have these problems. When you look at where these plants and you discover more, so sometimes we never find out. But when you find out the details, you're like, how did no one correct for that? They've known about some of these issues, like the listeria and the Boar's Head. They've known about it for a couple of years. There's a crack in the floor. Crack in the floor is the first place you look, and a drain, places where water accumulates. So it's not a mystery where this stuff comes from. And when you get enough of it, because again, it's everywhere. It's in our kitchens, it's everywhere. But when you get enough, it can get airborne. And then that's when you get into trouble.
Gotcha. Right.
Yeah. So they had enough of it in their environment that it became airborne and it got into their food. They didn't catch it in the finished product itself, but they also didn't just do the visual test to see, oh, there's a crack in the floor. We have to fill the crack. We have to find out where the water came from that got into the crack, right? You have to follow through. You can't just clean up that spot. So I would say that anything, and you'll see this a lot in ZEGO with my company, I want people to feel confident in the safety of their food. And anytime I see that a company is not doing what they're supposed to do to keep the food safe and people are getting hurt, it makes me mad, because not only are they obviously hurting people, some people have died, but they're also decreasing their faith in the food system. And what be good people in the world if we're so worried about our own basic food every day, right, that we can't have calm and peace of mind about that.
Right. I mean, there are things in place or should be in place based from the FDA and the USDA on how food should be manufactured in those rules and protocols. And if they're broken, you do lose faith in that, right? And what should you trust? And I mean, and Boar's Head is a huge example to me because it's in every grocery store. That's what you typically buy in a grocery store is Boar's Head and my Harris Teeter here. I mean, that's all they sell as far as I know is the pre-cut meat, not the pre-cut, the meat that they cut. But my friend from Levy checked with his chef when he saw it, and the chef's like, nope, that's not what we buy. So it depends on, you do need to ask those questions. And which then jumps me to a reminder of when the romaine lettuce recall happened years ago, right? And I was in a Longhorn Steakhouse with my grandmother, who was 95 at the time or something. And and every one of their lettuces or salads said romaine. And I'm like, okay, to the waitress, is your romaine clean or is your romaine safe? And she's like, what are you talking about? And had to get the manager to come over and tell me, yes, our romaine is not from that source but it's like,
right.
How do you hear about it? What do you do? Right. So.
Yeah, it is really hard to keep up with all of this. And even me in my industry, I don't get on the FDA site and see who is recalled every day.
Right.
There's another little thing that people should know when it says voluntary recall. These are not, the FDA never has a mandatory recall, because when the FDA says to you, you should either voluntarily recall this or we're going to make you recall it, you're going to voluntarily recall it. So the fact that it says voluntary recall doesn't mean that it's less of a problem.
Right.
It's a technical definition.
Interesting. Okay. That it's kind of a forced recall, but they're letting you say that it's a voluntary one.
Yeah, you get a choice.
Yeah, you get a choice. Okay. How can we be prepared, individuals, companies, food service providers, be prepared to handle food safety crises like these? I mean, how deep do we need to get in with, and this is kind of a real long question here. I mean, a meeting planner is not going to go to the chef and say, okay, give me all of your guidelines of how you choose your vendors, right? Or choose your products. But how can we, if we're looking, let's just say if we are a chef, how can we find more information about the food that we're serving or understand and be better prepared by choosing foods that I'm going to say we'll never have this happen to? That's not probably possible, but
it's not ever, there's no way to get risk down to zero, right? That's just
right.
Sort of the definition.
Okay.
But you can definitely do certain things, and they're not necessarily what you would initially think of. You know, some of the things that I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we talked a lot about cooking your meats. And when you were pregnant, you were supposed to, if you got deli meat, you were supposed to cook it really quickly at home before you ate it, because that's going to kill those pathogens.
Right.
So if you're going to serve sausage and you're really worried, or sliced meat, you could go ahead and cook it. You could choose organic if that's in your budget. Now, the reason why some people will say, no, organic is worse with these things, it's not actually true. The reason why organic is helpful is because you have an additional auditor coming in every year and checking the whole plant. Now, they're checking for organic certification, but if they see something wrong, they're supposed to report it, right?
Okay.
So that gives that extra set of eyes. And as far as just good manufacturing practices, the FDA doesn't really go around checking that unless you're someone like a meat manufacturer like Boar's Head. They actually had someone from USDA on site assigned to that plant. Meat is different, but in my world, we do oatmeal. We do not have regular inspectors coming in outside of organic and kosher. So in some cases, if you can't afford that in your budget, that's a great way to think about it, because there is confidence. That is a government regulated program, and there's criminal penalty for not following the rules of organic and not getting those audits. And the auditors take their job very seriously. So,
that's good to know.
Yeah, they do. They take them very seriously. Let's see. You can also plan on using things that have been processed as little as possible. So you want as few human touch points as you possibly can, because every time there's a touch point, you have the chance of introducing a pathogen. So when you think of something like, let's take oatmeal. Oatmeal, when we get it from the farm, right, is dry. When we get it, it only has about 10% water activity. And then that's very dry. So it's very hard for any pathogen to live in a dry environment. So the drier the product, better, right? So that's why you can store like groats, oat groats, or quinoa that's not been hulled. You can store those for decades. We've had historically, we found these old milk storage facilities in Greece and things that have 1,000 years later, they still have seed in there that's live. It's yeah, it's pretty incredible. So assuming you're keeping it dry, right?
Right.
And then the chef is cooking it, right? So that's when the water is introduced. And then it's hot until the person eats it. There's very little opportunity for your bowl of oatmeal to actually have a pathogen that can survive that.
Okay.
Now, when you're talking about something like meat, cheese, those are wet. They're usually not cooked. You're going to have more problems in those areas. And let's see what else. Also, something you might not think of, and this goes to the Quaker Oats thing, and I think is really relevant for meeting planner, is bars. So we used to make bars, so I'm very familiar with making bars and what we do at our critical testing points. We use what we call water activity level, because again, if there's no water or water low enough, then the pathogens can't survive. So we knew exactly what threshold we were looking for. And if the batch came out higher than that, you tossed it. Because you could have mold growing, you could have listeria, things like that could then spread. It is more of a problem when you add water and then rehydrate it. So if something came to you wet in the first place.
Okay.
Right. So you're adding in water, which could have contamination. You're mixing it up with whatever your dough is, whatever. And then you're making, say, a cracker and you're drying it, or a bar, and you're drying it again, hydrating it. Then you're concentrating whatever pathogens might have been in that water or might have been in during that process. So that dehydration process, actually. So that's a lot to remember. Just think of it as touch points. How complicated is the product? The more simple it is, the less likely you're going to have trouble. Right. And of course, you're going to follow those food safety issues as far as putting it out on your trays, right? You're going to have heat temperatures checked, all of those things, right? Or that you keep them hot or keep them cold, because cold is also the way to keep those pathogens from growing and becoming a problem.
Right. And that's a lot to think about. And when you're taking food safety classes, we learn to become a food safety manager or certified. You have to understand time and temperature controlled. It has to be kept below this temperature and above this temperature. And because when it's not, then those pathogens have the ability to grow.
Right.
And that's why we only keep buffets out for a certain amount of time and switch the food out and things like that. So, and I think that's, and food service companies, catering companies and such are, I think, keeping track of what's being recalled. And if they have those things, hopefully pulling those items from their menus. All right. So tell us a little bit. You've talked a lot, or you've shared things that you do. So tell us what ZEGO Foods is and how you got started. I know we talked about this 4 years ago. I just found it. You were one of my first 10. But so tell us why you founded ZEGO Foods and what you do.
So I have celiac disease, and I was diagnosed when I was a teenager. And by the time I was having kids, I was noticing that more and more people were getting diagnosed with celiac disease as well as food allergies. My kids were born in the early 2000s, which is about the time when we hit a real hockey stick moment in food allergy diagnoses. And so we were, in our family, avoiding a couple of things like gluten, and my daughters had dairy intolerances. They're not allergies. And then our schools decided to go nut-free, which is very common now, but at that time was brand new. And so I was like, oh gosh, what am I going to find that's nut-free and dairy-free and gluten-free that's healthy, that I feel good about giving to my kids, that isn't going to just get gross in their backpack? And I looked around, and getting back to that mad word, I got really mad because it seemed like everybody in the allergy-free space was making like imitations of bad food that we shouldn't be eating anyway. So it was like Pirate Booty Puffs and a cookie that looks like a cookie and kind of tastes like a cookie, or that type of thing. It was all around treats. And so I wanted to have a company that sort of from the ground up, we built recipes based on safe ingredients, and we provided the highest level of nutrition that we could, because these are folks who have autoimmune diseases, right? They're compromised. So they were getting the worst nutrition. And I was like, well, why shouldn't we get the best nutrition? So I started a company that would provide value-added products from Mother Nature. So, for example, our oats are a special variety that have more protein, iron, and fiber naturally than typical oats that are sold in the US. So that type of thing. So we were always like, we add in, we have new superfood oatmeal now. We add in lion's mane mushroom, organic lion's mane mushroom, as well as another mushroom that provides vitamin D. We value it up with ingredients that are at their base very low processing. And then on top of that, we want to make sure that these foods are as pure as possible, because so many people are sensitive to so many things now. So we test for pesticide residue, heavy metal residue. We test for mycotoxins. We test for all kinds of things to make sure that all those other things that can harm your short and long-term health are either minimized. In the case of heavy metals, you can't ever get something completely free of heavy metals because it's in our environment, in our earth, or free of. And so that's where we come down. So we believe, we call this purity verification.
Okay.
We believe that every customer has a right to know if there's toxic residue on their food, and brands have an obligation to be testing and revealing that to consumers before they buy or eat the product.
Okay, so I'm just going to the grocery store and I'm buying some random product. I mean, they're not saying that on their box anywhere, right?
No, there's a lot of effort in the Better For You brands where they're trying to come up with different ways to do this. So of course, organic certification is the oldest of these certifications. People have a lot of confidence in it. It does have a lot of meaning. There's the new ROC certification, which is the regenerative organic certification. There's glyphosate-free certifications. Like glyphosate is the most commonly used herbicide and has been linked in studies to quite a number of health issues and environmental issues. Some people disagree with that. A lot of people don't. But if you are only testing for glyphosate and getting a glyphosate-free badge on your product, there's hundreds of other herbicides that can be used that are way more toxic than glyphosate. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So like if we're talking about paraquat, which is used on oats as an alternate or to lower glyphosate, if you drink a thimble of it, you'll die. So it is that concentrated. So they have to dilute it when they put it on their fields.
Right.
And it causes Parkinson's disease.
Oh.
So in the farmers. So if they have a genetic predilection to having Parkinson's disease, they're 11 times more likely to get Parkinson's if they've been spreading paraquat. Yeah, it's really interesting. So brands are doing different things. And what we're trying to do with the way we handle it is, number one, we're not giving you a value statement. Where our only value is transparency. We have what we think are the right thresholds that we use for ZEGO, but we give people if you were to scan the QR code on any of our products or go to zegofoods.com on our website, you would see that you can actually not just see what our tests are, because you can actually see the test results there on a blockchain for you to guess. But we give you a thermometer. Yes, there we go. We give you a thermometer image that then shows you and color-coded for example, lead. What's the baby food standard in the US for lead? What's the adult standard? What's the European standard for babies in lead? And so it gives you a relative comparison so that you know how to evaluate the numbers. Because again, we want to empower people, not scare them. So when we have one of these expose reports that comes out and says, oh, we found lead in cinnamon, right? We had that problem with that's the one, with the cinnamon in the baby foods, right?
Right.
Applesauce pouches. It was an extraordinary amount of lead. This was not this would be an amount of lead that you would put on a spoon and mix in. Like this is a lot of lead that was in there, but it was being adulterated to make it cheaper to make the product. It pops the color. It's sweet. So when people questioned me, because I did a couple reels on it, they said, we think that you're fear mongering. I'm like, look at the thermometer. This is above the adult limit in Taiwan, EU, and US is 100 parts per billion. This is 2,000 parts per million. Right? This is way off the scale. So we want people to know when they should be concerned. We also want to know with them to be able to say, I'm not that worried about that amount. Like 2,000 times, like that's actually a multiple, right, of 1,000. So it's like 2 million times the size that you want to, you should be worried about that. Maybe you read that there's a lead level, let's not a good example, arsenic level. There's arsenic in lots of things. And there's going to be arsenic in your food. And you read the level and you're like, is 50? Is that a lot? What is a parts per million per billion? It doesn't matter. You can look at our thermometers and say, oh, okay, I see where 50 is. That's still in the green zone, or maybe it's in the yellow zone. And you're going to choose to eat that. So we don't make those for you. We give you the information so that you could be an informed consumer.
Well, and I'm going to zoom in on that too. So like what she was just saying. So the highest level is the 2627 parts per, what's the B?
The billion. Yeah. And that one is for glyphosate. So ZEGO and USDA organic products should be under 10. That's the industry standard on glyphosate.
Okay.
Glyphosate, again, it's in the water, so you can't completely avoid it. It's kind of like heavy metal in that way.
Okay.
And so we say, okay, well, what is the average amount of glyphosate that we find in conventional products? So we looked at actually USDA data for the past several years that they've been collecting on glyphosate in oats. We said, oh, that's 630 parts per billion. So now you can see. So people who say, oh, there's no difference in organic and non-organic, we can say, well, yes, there is. You decide whether or not you can afford to make that choice, and that's important to you. We're not going to decide that for you, but we are going to inform you, give you the transparency to know, yes, we're below 10, average is 630, but USDA did find 5% of brands were above 2,000.
That's scary. And then here's the one for lead, right? This is lead lab results at a adult limit.
Yeah. What we did is we looked at international baby food standards as sort of like fine. And so ZEGO is always going to aim to be under those international baby food standards. And again, we use that because it's intuitive for people. They know that we are more careful about things for babies. And so they're going to know just intuitively that is good. Right. They don't have to understand all the details. And if they did, they would just, honestly, I would just give up. If I had to, I want to give up every time I have to run these numbers. Like it is a hassle. It's very difficult. So we try to make it really simple for people to feel empowered.
Right. And I love that because transparency is key. And I think in a lot of studies, and someone that I look at a lot is the Food Information Council, IFIC, International Food Information Council. And people are looking for transparency. They want to know where their food is coming from and how it has been. The first word that comes to mind is adulterated, but that sounds like a very bad word. But, how is it processed, et cetera? So, and how do you, okay, so I have two questions. I'm like, how do you know that farmer is doing that? It's getting a chef to go talk to that farmer and understand they're buying it from, or you as a manufacturer talking to that farmer who's growing that for you. But then again, and then my next question out of that is, if you're getting 1,000 pounds or bale of oats, and I don't know how it's distributed, sorry, you can't test all 100 pounds of that. How do you know how much is being tested or how much is being tested? Because maybe the batch on the other side is the one that's fine. And this one, there's this one little clump of it that's bad.
Right. And that's where you get into risk mitigation, right? We try to mitigate the risk, but we can't completely eliminate it. So there are testing protocols that the lab will put together for us. If we say we have a truckload of oats coming in versus we have a couple of pallets versus I want to test a batch of 500 pounds. And so it's different protocols depending on what the size is that's coming in. And of course, you're looking at that water content level, the relative risk, like our plant, because we do only gluten-free grains, we don't have much water there at all. We only use water when we actually are doing the full clean out of the facility. So we're switching from conventional to organic because any facility that does organic also does conventional because there's not enough organic business in the US to have a plant that just does organic for the most part. So we'll need to clean out all that. Well, you know that there's certain critical points where you have junctures in your equipment that you have to unscrew and you have to make sure that it really dries out. You don't want to dry it with air because, again, if you have pathogens, they'll fly around. The big problem with milk and chocolate, those pathogens just fly everywhere. And you don't want to use a rag to dry it. You actually need to let it dry overnight in the open air. And that can sometimes add costs because you have to wait. You might need to do a short production run like, oh, I wish I could do 2 in one day, but you can't because you have to wait for it to air dry. Now, if you're trying to cut corners, you might choose to do otherwise and risk that. So I think one of the questions is, first, for a couple of things. One is, if you have control over knowing what the brand is behind the item that you're ordering for your meeting, what is that brand known for? Right. What do they say is their core value that they offer you? Is it low price? How do you get to low price? Well, you might get to it by not running as many tests as often, or letting your hiring temp labor at a lower cost who might not be trained in certain things. Right. So that might be an issue. But also you can ask your supplier, if you have a good supplier, like I think it's a lot I do know chefs who, in the meeting planning area where they are working with farms. That's a lot to ask when you're working on this large scale, right? Or small scale, where it's a lot to ask to get to the farm level. So you usually would go through a supplier, and the supplier should be able to provide you with a COA, the certificate of analysis, with what you're buying. So whether you're buying oatmeal or eggs or whatever it is you're bringing in, pre-made frittatas or whatever, they should be able to give you a certificate of analysis with all of that on there. And what you want to make sure is you ask them, how often are they testing? Because if it's a certificate of analysis that they ran 4 months ago versus one that they ran the day that they made your products, that's a difference, right? So knowing what to look for is important. And that will probably be great training for meeting planners also, is just to know, like, what do you look for on a certificate of analysis? It may certainly be great for chefs.
Right.
But
exactly.
It's not standard. Interestingly, it's not standard.
Okay. Oh, and that's important to understand, that there is not a standard of that happening. And I'm going to bring up the cost thing here, because there was a conversation in a Facebook group, National Meeting Planners Facebook group this morning, is like, how are you all managing the price of food right now? I mean, some people are paying $200 a gallon before tax and gratuity for a gallon of coffee. And the price of a bag of popcorn, I was charged $9 for the little grab and go bag of popcorn, plus gratuity and tax. So when we're looking at, I want to buy ZEGO foods and I want to serve ZEGO at my event, or sometimes that cost, I can't afford it with my budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Especially when you're wanting those prepackaged with single serve.
Right. Yes.
It's really less so the food cost as it is the packaging cost. Okay. How much labor goes into putting that package together. So the more you go from a pallet, 2,000 pounds of something, down to 1 ounce in a sealed container, the amount of money that starts going into packaging versus the percent that goes into the actual product is really low. So if you have the flexibility to do more things, and I know you don't always with meetings, especially if you do like a fast break, you can't like serve a big bowl of oatmeal. People are going to go run out and have a big bowl of oatmeal. But if you can find options like that where they don't have to be packaged, but you could buy more in bulk, then you can more easily work with, we could work with meeting planners directly or through food service supply to supply them with U.S. grown organic oats that have been purity verified, or what we call clean conventional, which are not organic certified, but do have all the testing. So that's a lower price point. So we can help work around that. And in some cases, we would be willing to take a huge cut on our margin because we just want our farmers to have good business, right? The farmers who grow for us, because we have a specialty oat, it's not only gluten-free, it's also higher in abuse nutrients, as I mentioned. As opposed to getting 8 cents a pound, they can get up to 40 cents a pound. And so, when you're talking about U.S. farmers who are going bankrupt, every week we have U.S. farmers going bankrupt, that's a huge difference if they can be making more money out of their land and we're not importing those value-added crops from other countries.
And I actually saw a story about that, from this week, and I'll go find it, but New Hampshire. And it was one chef who's saying, hey, they were keeping all of the money in their county. 60% of what they were buying was from within a certain distance or county or wise or whatever. And I thought I need to go find it because I thought it was interesting. And by buying local.
Yeah. That is interesting. And there is a brand right now called Snacktivist that actually can help around planning like that in food service, where they are so close to the farmers at Snacktivist. And if you said, we're having events in Washington State and we want to buy from within the state, and they work with ancient grains. They could bring you sorghum or millet or whatever that is, and they can bring it from the farm and identify the farm for you. And they lean on the conventional side, so you're going to have that lower price point, but you get the value add from the ancient grains. Maybe you don't do it every time, but maybe you swap it in from time to time, right? An alternative to support those healthier grains as opposed to wheat all the time.
Well, and that reminds me of asking for different options for the grab and go prepackaged stuff this summer, and the options that were provided to me through the food service portal, I was like, no, because I needed ones that were nut free. And and the options that were provided to me by the hotel, I was like, yeah, no, thank you. I'm like,
well, and when you add in sesame free too, since that's now the 9th regulated allergen, I think that still the industry hasn't really adjusted to that yet. So I would imagine that probably hit food service pretty hard.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I was just like, we'll just stick with the ones that we have, which was popcorn and beef jerky. And but again, I was grossed out by what they offered as an alternative.
That's not good.
No. And that's what they were offered because they needed to buy it through their food service provider.
Yeah.
They weren't taking this.
I'm going to give you a little story to explain because I think it's helpful to know why those prices get so high. So we've been pricing out a product that we really wanted to provide food service, and we still may be able to. And it involved like a pudding, like a rice pudding, but made with ancient grains.
Okay.
And it has all kinds of health benefits, great things. When you start pricing out just the shipping, because you can't do all the processing in one plant, because there's been so much consolidation in the industry that if you want to do one thing like IQF, where you spin the grains with water so that they cook just right and all that, you do it at a facility in California. And then you want to do that with some special treatment so that it will last on shelf for longer than 2 weeks. Then you have to ship it to Pennsylvania for that. This is for a 1 ounce package, right? So, I mean, you know how much shipping has gone up.
Right.
So we just added up the shipping costs and we were like, well, this can't happen right now, maybe in the future. But the shipping costs alone, food service can't even afford us to just do walkthroughs. Like, I can't even follow around Taylor Swift on stage. I'd be exhausted, right? I couldn't make it through. Like, I wouldn't even start. So we can't even trace it through. Like, it's just so expensive just to get things from point A to point B. And this is one area where I really commend USDA on that. They realized after the pandemic, they did a lot of interviews and they found that the lack of regional processing that has happened because of all the consolidation that's been allowed in the industry over the decades has really impacted food security in our country. And one of the ways that you're seeing that is that you're having these really high costs because of things like that I just described.
Right.
So they're putting money, USDA is putting money into building up regional facilities so that will have more processing capacity, and that will help with food prices.
That's interesting. And it's something that we don't take into consideration when we're looking at how much the cost of something. And I want to jump us back to 4 years ago, because I think you said, and maybe it was in a conversation that we had on offline or whatever, but is that a lot of these free from products are getting their grains from not the US, right? And so that's a huge cost. And that's one of the things that you're doing with what you're doing with ZEGO in your new facility. Did I say that right?
Yes. And sometimes, unfortunately, importing from other countries is cheaper than growing it here, which is ironic and unfortunate. And you do lose control over your supply chain. So the further away you are in location from what you're sourcing, so say we're sourcing something from China, which we try to never, ever do. It is so far away from us. Their system is so murky. There is no transparency. If you talk to a Chinese supplier and say, can you help me locate what province this was grown in? Not even the farm. They're like, we buy from thousands of farmers all across China and we just throw it all in the back of a truck. We have no idea. Like, you just cannot trace it back. So it is, because we are focused on food purity, we necessarily are focused on U.S. farmers because we know where they are. We can see them. We can visit them. We know that they're regulated under U.S. regulations and that they are visited. They're organic. A lot of our farmers are organic, but we're getting those visits and we're getting that paperwork and the testing done.
We've got to follow that. Me as a meeting planner, I'm not going to follow that all the way, but I'm relying on you or my manufacturers to follow that through. And are you seeing a lot more companies that are wanting to do this transparency in what they're making and what they're serving? And it reminds me of a story from a long time ago from Fast Company that was showing where honey came from. And it says it was local, but then it showed that it really came from China, right? And so are you finding more companies that are wanting to answer this calling for transparency?
Yes, they definitely are. They know that consumers want it. It's one of the top consumer desires in food right now, that traceability. they don't always know why they want traceability. So I often note that, so that's great if I see a picture of your farm, but what I'm really wondering is, why are there no weeds in that farm? Like, what chemicals are you putting on that there's no weeds in your farm? Or like maybe that farmer actually uses Monsanto GMO seeds, and I, as a consumer, don't want that. I can't tell that by looking at your farm. Right. So that's why I think the farm pictures are great, because it gives you that visual connection. But I want that testing. I want to verify that's really clean. And even in the organic industry, we test a lot for all these pesticides, and we should not find any, right, if it's an organic product. I can count on one hand. We've been in business 10 years. I can count on one hand the number of times we've actually come across organic fraud, but we did catch it because we were testing. So organic does provide you with security, and then this testing gives you extra security and confidence for both you and your consumer to show, there really is a difference with organic. It really does make a difference. So we think that the verification is very important. And again, if you don't think it's important, that's fine. You just like us because we're allergy-free and gluten-free and corn-free, and that's great. But whatever reason you find ZEGO, whatever reason you need purity for, right? We're your company.
Okay, so are you corn-free?
We are.
Like even the packaging is corn-free?
The packaging is corn-free. The facility is corn-free. Everything is corn-free. And that's very unusual in the industry, because there's so many corn derivatives that are added to products.
I need to tell that to Amy Graves. Do you know Amy?
I don't know her. Does she?
I interviewed her, and she's got a severe allergy to corn. And kind of going back to the thing you said a few minutes ago, is that her dad was in the fields putting the pesticides on. And so before she was born, and that's how she actually got the allergy to corn, but she didn't get that until she was older.
If you live near cornfields, the pollination, corn is just floating through the air at certain times of year. And so there's more corn allergies, corn reactions happening the closer you live to where corn is grown. I have a relative who is so sensitive to corn, she has to grow her own food and wash it in spring water that comes from a certain company, because they don't filter it. It actually is from the spring, not filtered, because a lot of the filters have corn in them.
And that's what she found. She had to move from another state to California because of the stricter regulations around organic, and buy direct from the farmers so that she could eat. And she can't buy stuff that is in a package that's made with corn.
Yeah, it's a real problem. It was a really problem. And there's so few manufacturers who are corn-free. We're in one now. We're moving to our own facility this fall, but we're in one now called Taylor Gleason Enterprises. Okay. And then we'll have our own, and we'll be at Montana Gluten-Free, which is, we're under the business model we call CIVIC, which is Collaborative Integrated Value Chain.
Okay. And you're not making food I'm posting my interview with Amy on here.
Oh, great.
With Amy Grace. You're not making food just for ZEGO. You're making it for other companies as well?
Yeah, we're going to make food for other values-aligned companies who want to provide the same purity transparency. So we'll be providing them purity transparency. Now, whether or not they want to share it with their customers on their website like we do and with our QR code, that's up to them, but we will give them that purity information. So it's great for a company that maybe wants to start on that journey and clean up the supply chain. We can help them with the testing. We'll be actually bringing in the ingredients for them, so we know what to ask when we get from the suppliers. Let's say they need blueberries or they need whatever it is. We will pre-screen the ingredients to make sure that they're safe coming in, so they don't have to take on that cost and burden. And by being a manufacturer, what's nice is that when we were just little old ZEGO, just a brand, we had to shoulder all that cost ourselves because we were doing all the tests just for us. By moving into our own facility and co-packing and providing ingredients for other gluten-free brands, we can now spread out that cost across many brands and many products. So the cost will go down dramatically, like 90% of doing all the testing. And that's where you can really start to scale. So we're going to move this purity verification from the brand to an ecosystem with our collaborative integrated value chain. And then the goal is that it moves into systems change after that.
Okay. Wow. Lots to think about and lots to do.
It's exciting. And we have a great grant from USDA to help us work on this as well. So USDA and the organic market development grants that came out, they are really being supportive on both developing this regional processing capacity that we're building in Montana, and then also expanding its purity verification program.
And I'm just thinking about those other products, will you be able to share what products you're making for, or is that just got co-branded and you're not going to disclose who those are?
We haven't started doing that yet. So we're moving into an older facility and we are doing some repairs, bringing in some new equipment. So that's going to take
filling in the holes on the ground.
Yeah, luckily they don't have holes on the ground, but we do have some other things that we want to do around there to raise it's not a basic acceptable food safety standard. We want to bring it up to the highest food safety standard, the BRC food safety standard. So that's going to take us a little bit of time this fall. We're bringing in faster equipment, so that will lower the cost to the consumer because we won't have to put in as much labor to making each bag. So we want to make it economically viable for companies to come to us and co-pack there. So once we have that set up, then we can start reaching out to those brands, many of whom I know, and we've been seeing them at food shows for years. And we talk to them about, hey, if you would like to either have us co-pack for you, so mix your things and put it in bags, or we can source for you. So whether, for example, it's very difficult if you're a small or medium-sized brand to purchase U.S.-grown oats, because in the U.S., if you want U.S.-grown oats, you have to buy 10,000 pounds or more at a time.
What?
Well, yeah. And most small and even medium-sized brands can't use that much, or
right.
They can't store it. So
right.
We can then serve them and work as an intermediary where we can sell in 50-pound bags or a pallet, or if you need a pallet a week or a pallet a month, mm-hmm. We can work with people so that then as they get bigger, we can pass them off to bigger suppliers and say, here you go. Here's a client that we cultivated for you. They started on U.S. oats. They're committed to U.S. oats and they're going to stay with U.S. oats. Whereas right now, our system encourages new brands to go to Canada or another country to get oats, because they can get it by a single pallet or a 50-pound bag. Gotcha. And then as they get bigger, they just sort of stay with that supplier. It's much safer feeling to stay with the same supplier than to switch.
Well, and it reminds me, too, of having a conversation with Red Plate Foods at the National Restaurant Association last year. And there was a distributor there talking to her, and he was leaving. I'm like, hi, how do I get her stuff, which is a delicious cookies and muffins and stuff, into my hotel meetings? And he just looked at me dumbfounded, but it's the same thing. It's like they want pallets of the food orders versus, because it's not a brand that's in every single grocery store or Costco all the time. I mean, so there's smaller orders, but that food service company the distributor, I should say, would not put them on their shelves yet.
Right. They're too small. Well, one of the reasons why we put together the business model that we are putting in place is that one of the problems for having new, better for you brands succeed and allergy-free brands and things like that is that the price on shelf in retail is really high, because they're not just paying all the fees everyone else is paying, they're also paying for that co-packing fee in the middle. So that's another 40% margin at that point that you're adding on to the cost. So with our system, the facility is treated more like a tool or a utility between the farmer and the brand. So it's going to operate at a healthy break-even level. It is not intended to be a profit center where we will sell off at 10x in 5 years. We're not chasing that sell-off. ZEGO, my brand, makes money. Other people's brands should make them money, but the facility should help them make money. Right. So, and that helps both the farmer, because we want them to be able to grow more value out of grains because they get paid more, and it helps the consumer because they can afford it, which then will help us get the volumes that we need in order to get into food service and provide a price point and volumes that work for food service. And I think that, as Tracy, that really is the key to food system change in the U.S. is getting into food service and making change in food service. And one of the ways that Snacktivist has been talking to the brand, as mentioned earlier, has been really having good conversations in food service to get around this price point question is, what are your ESG goals as a company? Mm-hmm. And we can help you reach those ESG goals because, for example, millet uses almost no water. We can give you metrics to tell you how much water you're saving by using millet instead of imported rice. Our oats use 50% less, or they emit 50% less greenhouse gases in the production of our oats because they're hulless oats than typical oats. We can give you those metrics. So even if we can't meet the price point that you typically want, what if we could meet your ESG goals for you? Then could you meet our price point?
Right. Interesting. Well, and I'm tagging on LinkedIn Eric Wallinger and Eric Wallinger from Meat Green, who I had a conversation with last year in October at IMAX, talking about how they're measuring the amount of water that's in that's used to make a water bottle because it's not just the water that's inside the water bottle, it's the how much water is used to make the actual bottle.
Oh, right.
And they were trying to find the one that had the least amount so that we could say we're really seriously looking at how much water we're using at this event in the food that we're ordering. So I'm going to tag him because I think that's a really interesting thing to think through, because Meat Green with their clients are really trying to push out, this is a brand or this is a food item that it's very water conservation focused, right? And I think, and it's a hard thing to grapple with, or not grapple with, it's a hard thing to understand. But if we're looking at ways to do that, or we can find brands that have that, then that's huge.
And it's not always intuitive. Sometimes it isn't, sometimes it isn't. Like oats take dramatically less water to grow than wheat. I don't know that anybody would naturally just assume that.
Okay, so say that again.
Oats take much less water to grow than wheat. So if I remember my numbers right, I mean, it varies by variety, right, of wheat and oat, but you're talking about 6 to 10 times more. I mean, it's a lot. Millet can almost grow with no water at all. If you, what they call drill millet, as opposed to tilling and putting it in, so you drill it down, drill the seed down, you can almost grow it with no water at all and harvest in 60 days. You have the climate friendly crop that is naturally gluten-free. It's high in protein. And it's ideal for meetings because we need chefs who know how to use it, right? The average consumer doesn't really buy it in America, even though it's the number one grain in Africa and it's either 1 or 2 in India. Like, it is a very popular grain. So chefs could come in and make a beautiful couscous out of U.S. grown millet that has so many environmental benefits that if there's with a company who has ESG goals, that can really make a difference for them. Right.
Right.
And then they met all those needs, right? It's clean, it's water conscious, and it's gluten-free, allergy-free. Like, it hits so many of those needs.
Right. Yeah. Oh, no, that's awesome. I love that. Thank you. Because it's really, and there's websites out there that you can go and track and say, okay, how much water does this plate, if I put chickpeas on here and fish and whatever, and it'll tell you a general idea of how much water is being used to make that plate of food. But I have no idea how many meeting planners would be doing that, but I think we need to rely on our food service partners to think through that too.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And we're doing that work with Snacktivists as part of our OMEG grant, which is to put together the information so the recipes using millet, because again, a lot of chefs aren't using fresh millet. And then also the information about the environmental benefits and all of that, so that they have it right there. So they don't even have to know to ask the question. We're going to give them the answer before they even know to ask the question.
Wow.
And that should be able to help them if they want to bring it in and say, hey, I can make a really great gluten-free main course, but grain-based. It can be vegan also.
Right.
You can put everything by making a beautiful couscous out of millet.
Right. Well, and puffed millet, I eat it as for cereal. It's really yummy.
Well, and you want to have the right variety too, right? Some of it is about variety. So that's another thing that we do. We're screening right now different millets to see which are the tastiest ones, because there's many different varieties of millet.
Who knew?
I know. But again, you don't have to know all of this. If you find companies and brands that you trust, that you know what they're focusing on. So like, if you're a consumer, that we're trying to find ingredients that have higher nutrition than you would otherwise get. Right. You know that we're trying to achieve the highest levels of purity. So even though you don't know what my listeria prevention program is, you know that my company focus is purity. So anybody who's got a purity verified, symbol on the front of their bag, they better have a good listeria program going, right? Like that's that's their reputation. They're staking their reputation on it.
Right.
So that's really helpful. So you can look for these ways of identifying what you use based on way more simple inputs than having to look at COAs and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, we are at the 52-minute mark. So I'm going to let you go. But this has been so interesting. And I really am. I mean, you and I have known each other for more than 4 years now, but I really am impressed by what you're doing and I appreciate it. And I do appreciate it. And I'm hopefully that you can help other brands move forward in this quest, but it really does come down to food safety. So one last question, 2 tips on managing food safety at this level, considering the recalls and things. What can a meeting planner or chef do food service wise?
I think choosing simple foods, right? Again, the fewer the touch points, the better. Following the basic food safety protocols that you already know, keeping things heated or keeping things cool are a couple of main things. And for things that you are more worried about than others, higher risk, if you can afford organic, go organic, because it's got that extra layer of inspection that happens because of the organic audits that happen, is what I would say. And I also want to give a couple shout outs because I think it's important, but we need partners to grow this type of food transparency. And in particular, Thrive Market has been great about bringing in products that are striving to make sure that their foods are pure. So if people who, not for food service, but for customers who are looking for like ZEGO products and other products that have been pre-screened, Thrive Market is great. Sprouts has been really good about bringing in innovative new brands and supporting them, letting us stay on shelf so that we can prove ourselves and build our consumer base. Some stores will take you in. If you don't sell within 6 months at a certain rate, you're out. That can drive a brand under. Sprouts will give you a couple of years to prove yourself once you're out of their innovation. They start you out in an innovation center. Often you have to prove yourself there. But that's a 90-day thing. And then after that, once you're on shelf, they really are committed to their brands. They really do.
Awesome.
And let you build that. So Natural Grocers is another store that is really good about things. They're not the only ones, but they're ones that we really appreciate as partners in particular, because they are working hard to help build this, because the brands can't shoulder the burden of cleaning up the food system. We have to have the support of the stores as well, and those online retailers and the meeting planners and all of that. Like, we're going to do what we can, but we see brands like ours going out of business all the time. So we really need everybody's help so that companies like ZEGO can continue to thrive and continue to grow. And eventually, our goal is that in the breakfast section, everyone is purity verified. It's not just ZEGO. Everyone is purity verified. That's what we want.
Right.
But we can't do that if we're not selling on shelf and we don't have supportive partners. So, and partners like you. So thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And one of your other fans and partners is Erica Dermer from, oh my God.
Celiac and the Beast.
Celiac and the Beast. Why did that just escape my brain? But yeah, she said, great interview. And you are doing the heavy lifting for the industry. So thank you very much for that. And it takes a village. It takes a community to do this. And you said it is really to change the food system and how we're doing things. And I commend you for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Wait, we're all part of the same ecosystem, right? So we are together.
Yes, we do. We have to thrive. And that's my, we're going to thrive.
I know, right there.
Yeah, with my speak word. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. So great to talk to you.
You're welcome. And hang on with me for 1 second when we're done here. Everybody, I will be back next week. Right here in studio for another episode of Eating at a Meeting. So until then, stay safe and eat well. And Nancy just piped in. Thank you both for this afternoon. You're welcome, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.